drivers and engineers, and you know, more fundamentally what we do in terms of development that carries into great cars, all sorts of things over the years. But then more specifically, what we get out of the driver, what the driver delivers, how we work with the driver. Do you work with the driver well? Or
I was just asking if you told you the truth. You can tell some stories.
I don't know that yet. So I mean, the fact is, you can ask any questions of Michael or myself. That's what we're here for. We're more interested in his answers than mine. But please feel free to fire away.
Obvious question, Michael. Why did you come back?
Well, because of jockey.
I said it was because of Ross. Thanks.
Combination of reasons. Ross is actually one important bit in the whole story. It just, I mean, I obviously stopped racing because I wanted to stop racing. Didn't think about at that time to come back. Having my 40th birthday at the time, I thought, okay, from all other sports, I'm sort of finished even from soccer, because when you're 40, you sort of normally past the edge. But then when Felipe had his accident and me sitting in the car, I thought, well, it still works somehow. And then Ross came along and asked the question some months later, and as a combination, Mercedes, Ross, and at that moment, feeling well for it, I thought, come back. That was the reason.
Are you really the Stig?
You know, I can't tell.
Fair play.
Next time.
You know, you were saying you're always looking to kind of do things in the future. How long are you going to stay?
That's, again, it depends on various factors that are unclear at the moment. It's a lot about how we develop, how we work together in future, not about jockey in person, but in general, how do we develop as a team? I mean, if things go in the right way for us to have a future or not have a future, and that's too early to say that right now. Yes, please.
We call it the teammates, but it's not exactly teammates, it's team enemies. How much do you keep it, like data that you have, how much do you keep it to yourself? And how much do you share?
Put it this way, it can be teammates. It doesn't need to be teammates, and probably mostly it is your first priority to sort of beat your team colleague. The sharing is completely open, because the data acquisition is open to everybody. You may have some personal secrets how you have achieved something, that there's no need to share this to your colleague, absolutely. Because I mean, at the end of the day, you want to be beating your colleague, you want to be better than him. But concerning the car development, you'd be basically obliged, and it is in your own interest, to communicate to the engineers, to the team, in a 100% way. Because I mean, the quicker you can develop a car, is good for both of us. And then after, it's just up on us to try to be better than the other guy.
From my perspective, as Michael said, it's in everybody's interest to develop the car as quickly as possible, and that intra-team rivalry only really comes about almost as you go into qualifying. You know, Saturday morning, you're looking for little tweaks where you can say, you know, maybe we'll just have a little bit of front toe or a little bit of ride height that they haven't got, that'll give us a little bit of an edge. But everything you do throughout the week, throughout the Friday practice, is all, you know, what are they doing? They'll tell us what they're doing, and the other side will say, you know, by the way, we run a softer rear, and that seemed to be better, so we'll, you know, we put that on for Saturday. But then come qualifying, it sort of becomes two sides of the garage, and then obviously during the race, less so, because your race tends to be your own race, if you see what I mean. But obviously, once Michael and Nico are nose to tail on the track, as we've said a number of times, they're free to race as long as they don't take each other out, and you know. And then you see some quite intense battles, and that's when it's just down to two gladiators. But generally speaking, you need two good drivers who will work together, who will tell each other, "Oh, have you noticed this? Yeah, I noticed that. Actually, now you mention it. Yeah, we need to go and talk to so and so." And that, you know, they can can take each other up a level by just telling each other what's going on, because it sort of reassures them, oh yeah, okay, that is a car problem, and I thought it was just me, or I thought there was a bit of dirt on the track or something, but actually if you noticed it as well, then maybe we've got a problem there. And so we get to iron it out, and we get to let the other 560 people in the team know what's going on. So it's important that they work together. Yep.
Throughout your whole career, who would you say was the best driver you've
I'd probably have to rate Mika Häkkinen extremely high. He was extremely fast, and overall race weekend, as John was saying, obviously we didn't work in my team, but you sort of drive Friday, you analyze, you try to find your position where you are in comparison to your opponent. And there were many weekends that we seemed to have a big edge on Mika on a Friday. And even going to qualifying, we looked like more than half a second quicker. Come qualifying, I don't know how they did it, but suddenly they're being a mile speed. And it's not just about fuel like we do in these days. We take out fuel compared to free practice. There you would prepare in qualifying equal condition, and you would really qualify, and it was zero fuel at the time. But they just manage as a team, driver, engineer, to sort of raise the game, put the car together, and it's always, the secret is to maximize your potential, because the car has 100% potential. How often can you hit this 100% and get it together? Because the combinations of setup that you have, that you work out with your engineer, I mean, it's like a huge puzzle. And sometimes you get the picture together, and sometimes you don't. And Mika was extremely good at this, with very good surprises.
We've had Jock's opinion on what sort of perhaps was lacking from the car in the past 2 years, but what kind of areas did you sort of think that might have been better, or should have been better on the car in the past season?
Well, put it this way, a perfect car doesn't exist. Good. But then there's other areas, like maybe the center of gravity, the weight distribution, maybe geometry that can be improved, setup range, and so on. So there's other bits and pieces that they have to be right to have a perfect car, and that's everybody's aim, to have a perfect car, to have the maximum potential within the rules that is permitted to achieve this.
If I can add that the important factor there, as Michael said, and you'll have to be aware of this going forward as engineers, is maybe early on in 2010, when we recognised that the car was not a winner, we all, as engineers, we all sit down with the drivers and what are the problems? Well, we think fundamentally they're probably aerodynamic, because aerodynamics have more power, you know, they have much more influence than most other aspects of the car. We think they're probably aerodynamic, and that immediately focuses people on, okay, we need to sort the aerodynamics out, which now means you have engineers like myself who are what we call sort of jacks of all trades. We sort of float around and get involved in this and involved in that. Our focus is now on the aerodynamics. How can we sort this? Have you seen the front wing that they've got? Have you seen the floor that they're using? Suddenly, we're now not thinking about saving weight, moving the weight distribution. So once you have something that isn't quite right, you then take your focus away from all the other things. And so by the end of the year, we might have improved the aero a little bit. But now, of course, we've dropped all the other balls. We've now let the weight get away from us, which we did at the end of last year. We've now let the suspension systems get away from us. And they're all areas that, because Red Bull had a quick car and they said, our aero's sorted, we can sort these bits as well. You get to the end of the year where you've distorted your season by effectively chasing the ball. It's like little 5-year-old footballers. You have to make sure that you have the stability to say, right, okay, the problem might be aero, but we still need to work on all these areas, because otherwise they'll start being a problem as well. And last year, I don't think we had the structure. I think we, exactly as I said, we were suffering from what happened in 2009, where we lost a lot of people and had a lot of changes, where we didn't have the structure in place for people to stay disciplined, and we dropped a lot of the other balls as soon as we thought, okay, the aero's not there. We all need to be start designing front wings and sitting on our armchairs and going, what you need is a floor like this, you know, and that's what happens. It's inevitable. You'll do it as engineers. You'll get drawn into. That's not your expertise, actually. You shouldn't be dealing with that. Just leave it to the aerodynamicists.
because he's doing, that's a good example what not to do. Please.
Obviously, as a driver, you really want to win, but is it not sometimes more satisfying to really have to compete for your position than to totally dominate a season?
It can be, absolutely, yes. I mean, I've had races, I've been winning, and been probably much less interesting than in like this year, fighting for fifth position with Lewis in Monza. I mean, certainly that was a nice battle. You take more pleasure from yourself in races.
You were saying earlier that, you know, Red Bull are doing this, so we should do that. Like, how much of it is developing what you have and what will work, and then watching what other teams are doing to make sure that you're keeping up with them?
There is inevitably the opportunity to spy on other teams down the pit lane. You know, the cars are driving past your garage every day, especially when they have a crash. If you sort of hang around Webber's car for a while, then bits will fall off it and things like that, and you can watch them as they fall off, and you can see where the fixings are, and that draws you into understanding, or trying to understand what people are doing. But again, it's a bit like the previous conversation. You cannot get drawn into, let's just copy what they do, because all of us, Michael will have been in this situation with a lot of the teams he's been at. All of us have been in the situation where there's a car out the front, and some of our engineers, some of our senior engineers are wanting to say, let's just copy that. And when you copy it, it doesn't work. How come it doesn't work? I thought it was, theirs seems to work. And the details are so fine that make a car come together as a package, that unless you have every detail of that car, you can't copy it with enough integrity for it to actually work. So you'll copy, and people did it this year with the blown floors. If you look at those exhausts that people put on the back of cars, none of us will have got out of it what Red Bull got out of it, because Red Bull designed into it at a very early stage. Everything about their car package was designed around that principle. And a lot of the other teams then arrived with that as a retrofit, as we call it. We just sort of, let's get a floor with some exhausts on the bottom. And we got something out of it, but we won't have got what they got out of it, because theirs was integrated in the whole design. And that's what you need to do. You need to make sure that now, in December, we are looking at what is going to work next year. Because if we wait until February and say, well, let's just see what Red Bull have got, for sure, whatever they've got, we won't be able to copy well enough.
Although, may I just add one point, and that is to analyze the other groups. Because I think for competition, it's always important to analyze what the others are doing, where they are stronger, where you are weaker, that you know what area to develop on and to improve yourself on. Because it's an ongoing process, it's a competition, and in order to be at the top end, you need to understand where's your weakness.
As an engine perspective, Ferrari power or Mercedes power, which was a joy to drive? Let's forget that you're with Mercedes at the moment.
I have a Ferrari still in my heart on that side. But the point is that the engine is surprisingly probably lower importance compared to the whole package of aerodynamic mechanical influence. If I go back to the year of '94, I made the experience to run a Ford engine, and in '95 I ran a Renault engine. And pure dyno figures was about 100 horsepower difference. But in '94 we had 100 horsepower less than the Renault engine had in '95. And still, we won the first 3 or 4 races that when Ayrton was still with us, because we had the better car, we had the better package, and we made the best out of it. So it's not pure power, first of all. It is a combination of power. Drivability is a very important factor. Fuel consumption, efficiency as a package is very important. And definitely, if you take the engines that are available right now, Mercedes certainly has the best packaging of this in terms of power, drivability, fuel consumption in the total.
You know, Michael was saying about how that a lot of the car is like restricted to like rules and regulations set. So how much has this restriction, actually the fact that the development of your car, what are the kind of restrictions that you guys have?
Well, it doesn't. Restrictions is probably not the right term. They are the regulations. They don't restrict us because it's all relative. We don't really mind what the regulations are. Things that stop you doing weird and wacky things. It is somewhat frustrating occasionally when there are changes to the regulations which you think that's a pity, because that was actually quite an interesting development. You know, all the active suspension days. Michael and I were both obviously we're young, but we started when we were young, so we were around in the active car days. And I don't know what driving an active car was like, but certainly engineering an active car, fully active suspension car, was fascinating. And you sort of thought, this is really good. You know, we could really develop some things here. And then bang, they shut it off on regulations, and you're like, oh, that's disappointing. So there's occasionally things that you find disappointing because you think that is actually technology that I think will go forward. Certainly when you look at road cars, there are things like the active suspension where you thought, well, this is going to be, a road car is now going to have more technology in it than a Formula 1 car, which in some ways is not great. But generally speaking, we just work to whatever we're given, and I'm not particularly conscious of, oh, you know, it'd be really good if we could do this, because as soon as you hit that wall, you think, well, no one else can do it either. What you have to think is, what do these regulations say, and how can I best work within these regulations and right up to the line? And that's the things like the double diffuser in 2009, and these sort of systems where actually that's very clever. It is on a race weekend. They're just sort of there in the background, and we know what they are, and you know, we're trying to be absolutely on the weight limit. We're trying to get the weight distribution as far forward as we can, and within the regulations and all this sort of thing. But that's what we've been doing, you know, year on year for the last 20 years. So. Yeah.
You said that you get results every 2 weeks, right? So, like, could you bring us through that 2 weeks, like the time flow, day to day? What do you do? When do you brief the driver? Things like that.
Yeah, we tend to bring a major upgrade to the car. So by that that would be something that would be worth maybe 3/10, 4/10 of a second upwards. We bring an upgrade to the car maybe 3 or 4 times a year. And so when those upgrades come round, obviously that's quite an intense, so that will come, for example, after the first 4 races going forward. That would be a crucial part of the programme, would be to get in the simulator and say, well, this is the new package in the simulator, tell us what you think, we'll make some changes. And we would tend to then bring everything together maybe on the Monday, Tuesday before a race weekend. And the parts probably still haven't been made. The parts are probably being made at the moment and will be arriving at the circuit on the Wednesday or the Thursday. Now that is quite late, you know, that is just-in-time engineering. But the implications of having, you could say, well, why didn't you get it a week earlier, and then you could make sure that it all fits properly, because it arrives at the circuit and we work till 2 o'clock in the morning because it doesn't fit properly in the, not because anybody's done anything wrong, just because these are the teething problems you have. And you might say, well, why don't you bring it a week earlier, then you can make sure it all fits perfectly. That is a week of development you haven't got. That's a week in the wind tunnel. Now, a wind tunnel should be producing around about half a tenth of a second every week in development. So you give it another week, that's half a tenth. You keep doing that for all the races, then you've lost 5 seconds along the way somewhere, you know, over the years. That's how development works. It is just time-based. As somebody once said to me, if you had next year's car last year, you'd win the championship. Whoever you were, if you had next year's car last year, you'd win the championship. Because development is not an absolute thing, it's a time-based thing. So we have to run the clock as close to the race weekend as we can so that we can get the maximum development. And then when we get to the race weekend, Michael will arrive on the Thursday morning, the engineers will arrive on the Thursday morning. And that's actually the first time we really get our heads around, okay, now we've got all the tools available, we've got simulations available, we've got all the data available, we've got everything in place. Now we can look at exactly what we're going to run tomorrow. It's that late in the day that we are fine-tuning. And you know, that does mean that sometimes we go out on a Friday and it just doesn't work. We haven't done our sums properly, and these new packages don't give what we wanted them to give, and you have to wait another 2 weeks before you get the value out of it. But but that reflects the skill of what we're doing. We need to make sure that we're doing the job well enough to get the development on the car and make it work on the day it arrives.
While development is going on the car until the next season starts, how is it that you prepare yourself for the next season?
Basically, the season is the off season is much shorter in these days compared to the past. So we stopped end of November. Last race, we just did another race last weekend. From last weekend onwards, I'm taking an off time for probably 2 or 3 weeks that I won't really move and then just rest and relax a little bit and let the joints and body recover. And then just around Christmas time, restarting my fitness regime. That basically is as much as you prepare a car, you need to prepare your body in order to stand the effort.
And I think it's worth pointing out, and of people I've spoken to over the years, so few people, probably including myself because I haven't driven a Formula 1 car, so few people have any perception of how difficult these things are to drive, and the environment. It's not so much the skill set that Michael has. You know, as I said before, you look at what Wayne Rooney does on a football field, and you can appreciate he's a very good footballer. You can see what's going on. You can't really see what's going on in the car with Michael because it's just a blob on the TV screen. It's a silver blob, and the environment is incredibly harsh. You know, you cannot look at what you do in a road car, even if you're driving a fast road car and you're driving it fast. That is so far removed from what Michael is doing that you just don't have any perception of the G-forces that are involved and just the aggressive environment. If you sat at the front of a roller coaster, next time you get on a roller coaster, sit at the front of a roller coaster and imagine, before it goes, imagine actually it's not on rails, I've got a steering wheel and pedals, and we're going to drive this roller coaster at the speed the roller coaster is going to go, but I have to make sure it gets around the corners. And imagine how frightening that would be, because that's what it's like. When you sit in a roller coaster and you're all over the place and you can't visualise the next corner because you've gone down and up again and like this. That's what it's like. You know, the number of times drivers come back to me and say, I can't really see turn 1, it's so bumpy I can't even see turn 1. And you think, how can you drive at that speed and you can't see turn 1? I have no idea where I'm braking. I just sort of like, I just hit the brakes and turn in because I can't, it's so bumpy. No, it wasn't. I can't see. No prizes for guessing who that was. But, you know, it is an incredibly harsh environment, and people, it annoys me that sort of people say, well, they're not really, they're not proper sportsmen, are they? I mean, you know, they don't have to be as fit as a footballer. I think we've seen in the last 10 years that racing drivers have got to the level where it does make the difference, and they are supremely fit just to do their everyday job.
Well, talking about fitness and stuff, as weight's really important, do you have to like get weighed every week before the race to include that in the weight of the car?
Absolutely, because the weight limit that we have to respect is driver and car included altogether. It used to be different in the early days. If you go back to the days of Nigel Mansell fighting Alan Prost, it was not the case. And for us, 10 kilo as a rough figure is about 0.3 of a second of a difference. And at the time, Nigel Mansell was about 20 kilos heavier than Alan Prost was. So he had a natural deficit of more than half a second, which, if you look hindsight, is an incredible achievement. Nigel competing against Alan Prost and beating him, because it's a pure limit and it's nature. That's a rule. And at the time, they didn't think about that, which is funny because if you go back, away from Formula 1 and you go to some slow or lower categories, not even 4 wheels, but if you take motorbikes, MotoGP, that is such a high level from engineering point of view and so on, but they don't have this. They just have a bike as a weight limit, and that's it. And they don't really look into that one, which I find total surprise that drivers and teams nowadays accept that. You take Valentino Rossi and you compare him with Stoner, and it's quite a big difference.
What are your views on where driver safety is at the moment? This is for both of you, and sort of where it needs to be, kind of in light of a few recent incidences in other motorsports as well as path, for instance? In
Well,
Formula One?
safety has been basically since I'm there has created a much bigger impact to develop, particularly since the day that we lost Ayrton Senna and Roland Ratzenberger the same weekend in Imola. Safety has become a much higher priority since those days, and the goal is that basically nobody is going to lose his life. That is the goal of what was said at the time. Are we there yet? We have improved massively, and Formula One has, since that day, I'm right, has never lost any life. But the point is, there is still the option, and there's still the possibility it could happen. So there is a permanent development still going on. The newest one is to have like a protection against an accident that Felipe Massa had at the time. And there are various ideas how to stop this. May like an air fighter plane.
Close
they have what do you call that? Canopy on top of the monocoque. So there's various ideas that they are in process to be developed on top of the passive safety that is the car. And the cars have been massively improved in terms of safety. The crash tests that they have to withstand in these days, the sort of pure figures that they have to pass is enormously high. And then the other thing is the circuits itself, to improve those ones and run simulations where circuits may have danger and improve the run of zones, not to let have any fatal accidents.
How do you handle when you have a conflict between performance and safety? Do you stick to just the regulation or do you go for additional safety?
It's difficult to.
Depends who you ask.
Two different answers here. It's difficult to think of situations where we're put in that situation because the regulations are pretty hard and fast now, and I think there is a feeling within the sport that that we have a responsibility these days. I think some of the issues that came about in the early 90s were partly from irresponsibility, to be honest. As a designer at that time, I was aware of things where you think, I wouldn't want to crash in a car like that. We were using materials that were the wrong side of that line that you're asking about there. But I think that's not come from anything other than a bit of complacency. People would gradually along the way, because the regulations didn't set things out, people would gradually along the way say, well, we'll use a bit of a high modulus fibre here. It's not so good in a crash situation, but it's only 10% down, and it will save us a bit of weight. And then, of course, next year, then we've got a new designer, and he's looking at it, he's going, yeah, well, we're using high modulus, so maybe we've got some new high modulus now, which is even higher modulus. Maybe we could use that. So they're not thinking, oh, to the safety, I don't care about the driver, let's just make it. It gradually gets out of hand because the regulations haven't taken it under their control. Now, the regulations take it under their control, where it's specified what modulus of materials we're allowed to use in what particular areas, and we have to pass crash tests. And we respect that absolutely. And that means it takes that, because you don't want to put individual engineers in the situation, you don't want to put myself and Michael in the situation where he's saying to me, oh, go on, just do it, I'll be fine. And I say, well, I'd rather not, because if you do have a crash, that is unfair. You can't put people in that situation, because he will always say, just go for it, I'll be fine. And I'll always go, no, if you have a crash, down to me. It's not fair, and I would say the regulations have done a very good job of taking that decision-making away from individual engineers, because you shouldn't be in that situation.
I have to say this would be the last question, because we do have to run on to the next program. Is that okay?
You mentioned improving the aerodynamics, and Michael mentioned the canopy, but what else are you developing at the moment? And is there anything new we can kind of, like new technology we should probably be looking for in the future?
Well, it's going to be a rather dull answer, I'm afraid, in that the kind of things we're developing are not groundbreaking in so much as it comes back to the conversation I had about copying a Red Bull, for example. It's in so much fine detail that we are finding huge performance. And the encouraging thing, and I think Michael's going to go along to the factory this afternoon just to catch up with some people. The encouraging thing on the aero program is the rate at which we're developing from some of the changes we've made, and they are very small. You know, you look at the car, and to be honest, for someone like yourselves, you would look at it and say, well, you know, it's not much from last year. When you look at the fine detail, it's those bits that are making huge impact on the aero performance of our car. So there's nothing groundbreaking, and if there was something groundbreaking, I wouldn't be able to tell you anyway. But it is just that evolution process and those small details that make all the difference.
Attention to detail.
Okay, kids, we have to go. So thank you so much for all your questions. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Joe.
You're more
So
welcome.
much. So please, a round of applause.
Well, wish you luck for your future then, and maybe see you around. Maybe I'm long enough around to see some of you guys. Cheers, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
God damn.